Hi, so today we're going to be continuing the conversation on due diligence, or in other words, doing your homework on the actual ownership dimensions of the property you're considering buying. If you haven't watched part 1, I'd advise you to go back and start there. Just make sure you don't miss any information, but I'll be sharing more on today's episode. I'm Solomon Wangwe and you're watching Own Land in Kenya. So yesterday I shared about the various steps of your due diligence, starting with land scouting, right? And I mentioned that the reason for doing your land scouting is because it will give you a good indication on pricing, the general pricing of property in that particular area, but it will also give you some great insights on the actual ownership. Let me just touch on that again, and you forgive me for hammering this away a little bit longer, just because it's critical information for you. This is where everyone goes off and gets into problems later. So I'm going to share every single detail I can about this particular stage of your land investment journey, right? So as far as your land scouting goes, when you talk to your neighbors or the neighbors of the property that you're looking to invest in, they'll confirm the actual identity of the owner. Another great thing they will do that will not necessarily come out when you do a search is the history of ownership behind that property. I'll give you an example. We looked at one particular property in Kajiado County once, and after interviewing the neighbors, even though everything was sound as far as documentation was concerned, even though we liked the owner, the pricing was right, the place was beautiful, we found out from the neighbor that the owner and his brothers were not at peace with one another. Their father had left them the land as an inheritance, and they had a dispute about the actual boundary of one brother's property as opposed to the other. And what would generally happen every time both brothers were on their property is that there would be a fight, there would be squabbles, and sometimes that would get to very dangerous levels. So we pulled out of the transaction simply because we didn't want to invest our money in a place where we wouldn't be able to access because of the animosity between the family members, right? There's no way a document search at the Ministry of Lands office will give you that information. That's another critical reason why it's good to talk to neighbors, right? The other thing on pricing is that even though you'll get a good indication on the general pricing for the area, I wouldn't necessarily get hung up on whether or not the price you're being asked to pay is higher than the general area. And the reason is simply because sometimes it's worth your while to pay slightly more for the right property in the right location with all the documents in order, right? We've done that several times where we've paid up to 30% higher on one particular property than the one next to it, simply because the documents were in order, we liked the owner, there were no issues in the family, and the location worked for us. So I just wanted to throw that in there as far as pricing goes. And yes, you may also get a good deal simply by asking, but I wouldn't let that be a stumbling block should the investment of that particular property make sense for you, right? So moving on to the second phase of your due diligence, which is where you've engaged a licensed lawyer. This means a licensed lawyer with the Law Society of Kenya, meaning they're licensed to practice in Kenya. Just because someone calls themselves a lawyer doesn't mean they're licensed to practice. It's very important that you confirm that. Once they've done for you a search, you've gotten your search certificate, and you got a certified copy of the green card, like I advised you to, the next thing you would need to do is come to terms with a land seller on what your actual sale price is. Once you've come to agreement on that, you'll pay a deposit. According to the Law Society of Kenya policies, a legal deposit in Kenya should be at least 10% of the purchase price, right? Very simple. It doesn't have to be 10%. Sometimes you can pay more. We've generally paid more simply because the seller had specific needs and we were comfortable with our due diligence to pay slightly more, right? If it's any less than 10%, legally speaking, your sale agreement would not be a legal one within the country of Kenya. So it's very important that you pay the right amount in your deposit. The less you can pay, the better, of course, to reduce your risk in case of issues later, but 10% is the minimum, right? Once you've decided on the price, you pay your 10% deposit. You will sign a sale agreement prepared by your lawyer. The seller will sign one, and their signature should be witnessed by their lawyer. I'm going to pause there for a second just to clarify that even though it's not uncommon or unusual to have one lawyer represent both the seller and the buyer in a land transaction, it is best always to have both the buyer and the seller have their own legal representation. Sure, it means that you pay a little bit more in legal fees instead of splitting the costs between the two of you if that's a negotiation. But should you have issues later, it'll be very difficult for that one lawyer to stand up for your rights and your best interests while doing so for the other side as well, if they represent both of you. So it's common sense to have each of you have your own legal representation. That's why I said that you need to have your own lawyer witness your signature, preferably your lawyer prepared the sale agreement or the seller's lawyer prepared the sale agreement, but the seller's lawyer needs to witness their signature for them separate from your own. I hope that makes sense. Thank you so much for taking time to listen to this episode. I know it was a little bit of information overload for you, and I did that intentionally just to make sure that there are no confusions in your mind about what you need to do to make sure you're making a safe and legal investment, right? So if you have any questions about this going forward, please feel free to reach out to us. Check out our website. We do this actually as our company Goshen Acquisitions as far as the due diligence goes. We only sell land that we wholly own. We don't do brokerage or agency for other people's property. So these are processes that we have gone through ourselves for the properties that we sell. So feel free to check out our website for any current opportunities you might be interested in. Give us a call, send us an email. We're also available on all the social media platforms indicated below, and share the information with your friends. I'm Solomon Wangwe. You're watching Own Land in Kenya. Stay tuned for more information on strategic land investment.